You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This past season, it felt like Akeem Hicks was sort of saying goodbye to Chicago and the Bears. But he could be a great fit in the new defensive scheme being brought in by new head coach Matt Eberflus. This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm an analyst for Pro Football Focus, and I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today and hopefully every day. On the show today, our look at the Bears' own free agents continues with Akeem Hicks on the defensive line. We'll look at what this past season and really the last few seasons have brought for Akeem Hicks, where he is at this stage of his career, how he fits into what this defense was doing, and then perhaps what this defense is going to do in the future. As an upcoming free agent, we'll explore what kind of a contract he could get if he hits the open market, how that compares to what the Bears already have on the defensive line, what they need on the defensive line, and what else they need on this roster. And then we'll kind of compare it to other options on the free agent market, what the Bears' alternatives could be if they don't re-sign Akeem Hicks, or what different dynamics could be at play when that market hits and when other teams could come calling for the veteran defensive lineman. Hicks not coming off of a great season, in large part due to his availability, his inability to consistently stay healthy. And, as a 330-pound guy at this stage, 335, I think is what he's listed at age 32, it can be hard on the body to play NFL football at any level, but especially at that size and with the physicality that Akeem Hicks plays, there are some very real questions about whether or not he can consistently in the 17 games this season, which is pretty good. I mean, it's not ideal, but it's more than half. But he was on the injury report almost every week. As I look through the injury report archives, I think I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-ish weeks where he wasn't on the injury report with something. He was down for an illness, missed a couple of games with a groin injury, and came back and missed games again. Then seemed to be a little bit better, and then out with an ankle injury for 4 or 5 games in a row. And then that ankle injury kind of limited him a bit later on in the season, kind of throughout the whole second half of the year. So the Akeem Hicks we saw on the field for the most part was not Akeem Hicks at 100%. He had 3.5 sacks this year after having just 3.5 last year on what felt like kind of a down year. And there were still like those flashes of Akeem Hicks, right? Good, disruptive, dare I say dominant flashes of Akeem Hicks, particularly that Vikings game. For some reason, Akeem Hicks always plays really, really well against the Vikings. We talked to Locked On Vikings host Luke Braun about that regularly. Like he just, for whatever reason, tends to have their number and really made some big time plays. I think he had a couple of sacks in that game, or at least 1.5, got to the quarterback multiple times and made some plays in run defense as well. I mean, just kind of all around finds new life whenever he plays the Vikings. And that was the game that really kind of felt like his goodbye. We kind of did that podcast after that game. Like, was that Akeem Hicks' swan song, his farewell to Chicago? It kind of felt like it, in part because that had been the feeling under the previous regime. Much like Allen Robinson, no one was outwardly saying Akeem Hicks won't be back, but there were reports that the team was listening to trade offers or allowing him to pursue trades. There wasn't really any progress on a kind of a long-term contract, and that the sides just generally seemed to be far apart. But that was the previous regime. And now we're on to Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus, and more importantly, we're on to a different defensive scheme. One where I think Akeem Hicks could find and enjoy a successful role. It would be different than what he was doing at times in the Bears' previous scheme, but not drastically different. Right? It comes down to the same kind of thing we talk about with, the 4-3 and the 3-4, and like how sometimes those differences can be overblown, and sometimes they do mean a little bit more depending on situationally and which positions you're talking about. But certainly in both schemes, in the nickel package, Akeem Hicks is playing pretty much the same spot. And the idea is that Eberflus is probably going to play the nickel package 70-ish% of his defensive snaps. So Akeem Hicks and everyone else will pretty much be in the same spots they will be the majority of that time. And so there's a natural fit there for him and for what the Bears want to do defensively. It's not as though this changeover phases out his skill set on that interior defensive line. If anything, it makes that spot in particular that much more important. It's something that he can really be a big part of, especially if you can get back to the healthy, younger Akeem Hicks, right? He's not going to get younger, but the first 3 seasons in Chicago, 7 sacks, 8.5 sacks, 7.5 sacks, and just an absolute terror in run defense. If you can get that level of Akeem Hicks again, or something close to it, healthy again, then he could be a really important member of what the Bears want to do in this new defense. I mean, it was sort of like we were kind of waiting for that in 2020 and now again in 2021. So it's been a couple of seasons of like, can he get back to that? And how many seasons before you sort of decide, you know what, he just can't. And that's where this re-sign decision becomes so challenging, because then like if you don't know whether you're going to get a healthy Akeem Hicks or how healthy he's going to be able to stay, and therefore what level of production you're going to get from him, how confident can you be in investing a contract, a significant financial investment in him? We know he's not going to make as much on his next deal as he does on his current deal. There's going to be a pay cut, but it's really like, how much of a pay cut could we see Akeem Hicks take? We'll take a look at a couple of different contract projections for him, look at how that fits into what this Bears defense may want to do and what else this team has at their disposal this offseason, next on Locked On Bears. Just because the football season is behind us doesn't mean there's nothing football related to bet on with our friends at BetOnline. Free agency and the NFL draft are a great source of prop bets throughout at least the early stages of this offseason. And then you can look ahead to futures for next season of regular season winners, division win-loss totals, and so much more next year's Super Bowl, and a lot of things you can work ahead to. But it's not just football either. BetOnline has basketball season in full steam, even getting towards the end of the college basketball season, but pro basketball well in the thick of things. And of course, soccer, hockey, tennis, boxing, perhaps baseball if we get a collective bargaining agreement at some point here. BetOnline is going to be the best spot for all of your sports scores and podcasts throughout the rest of the season, or any of the sports seasons here, with the latest odds, totals, and player performance props. BetOnline.net is the number one spot we recommend for all your sports betting needs. Head on over to betonline.net today. Check out everything they have, or you can use your mobile device as well to learn more about all the different trends and action you need to know. Because at BetOnline, it's where the game starts. So much of what this Chicago Bears defense is going to do in this new regime is going to start in the middle there. And a lot of this discussion with Akeem Hicks, I think, starts with what you're going to do with Eddie Goldman, because you start to think about how much you're investing into those 2 defensive tackle positions when you already have a significant percentage of your salary cap invested in your 2 edge rushing defensive end positions. So I think as of right now, this season, Khalil Mack will count as 15% or 14%, and Robert Quinn will count as 8%. So you're looking at over 22% of your cap, almost a fifth of your salary is going into those 2 players. So then how much can you invest then also in the interior defensive line? We talked last week, or was it even earlier this week? The calendar kind of runs together in my mind. But we recently talked on the podcast about, I think it was earlier this week, about Eddie Goldman as a potential salary cap casualty that, he's set to cost almost $12 million this season and hasn't been producing at a super high level. And perhaps you could release him, use that salary cap savings to add a replacement and also save a little bit of money on top of that this year and in the long term. But could you afford Eddie Goldman at his current salary and Akeem Hicks at a new contract to have 4 potentially well-paid defensive linemen across that unit up front? I think you can. There's certainly logistically, like literally, the Bears can fit that under the salary cap right now. but it's a question of other needs on your roster and where you want to invest that money on the offensive line, at wide receiver, at linebacker, at cornerback, at safety, and how those things come into play. Fortunately, Akeem Hicks is projected pretty universally to get a lower contract this time around than he did the last time around, given the stage he's at in his career. So we reference a lot here in the podcast Brad Spielberger at PFF_Brad, works for Over the Cap and also Pro Football Focus. Just he is really accurate at projecting the range that a lot of these contracts end up. And right now, for Akeem Hicks, he's projecting a 2-year deal worth $8.5 million each year. So for a total of 17, with $12.5 million guaranteed. And that's a cut down from where he is now, where this year he made $12 million. I think his contract was giving him $12 million a year. So it's definitely a pay cut for Akeem Hicks to come back. And presumably, teams aren't going to pay him the big bucks that he's making currently right now, given where he's been at in his career. But then, for a competitive projection, the folks over at Spot Track, which is another one of the salary cap sort of tracking websites, they're projecting him more at like 2 years for $11 total million. So $5.5 million a year instead of at $8.5 million a year, which is a pretty wide split between those two projections. Because you look at like some of the other current contracts of older defensive linemen, let's see. Obviously, J.J. Watt's kind of at the top at $14 million, so that's not a really accurate player to compare him to. But like Danico Autry is at $7 million a year at age 30. Carlos Dunlap is at $6.8 million a year at age 32. Benson Mayowa is at just under $4 million a year, although he's not quite up to Akeem Hicks standards. But it's a very murky spot because we don't know how reliable and dependable Akeem Hicks is going to be at this stage of his career. But certainly signing him at $5.5 million a year is a lot easier than at $8.5 million a year. But again, it could be even easier to afford that bigger number if Eddie Goldman is not a part of this mix. We just know that it is going to be an important thing for this Bears defense. And actually, new defensive coordinator Alan Williams, we heard a little bit of this when we talked about what Williams' plans for the defense, but I think it's important to bring it back up here when we're talking about Akeem Hicks specifically and how they talk about the importance of that 3 technique position that Akeem Hicks will play on their defensive line and how they want to build this defense from the inside out.
If you're talking about our 3 technique, we want that guy to be athletic. We want that guy to be instinctive. We want that guy to be able to stay on his feet. When he gets a one-on-one, we want that guy to be able to beat his one-on-ones. And really the things that I'm talking about, you can probably say that about, everybody on our defense about those things. We want that guy to play with relentless effort. We want that guy to be smart. So that guy is one of the staples of the defense, because one of the things I do believe is that good defense is built through the middle. And so that's the middle part of our defense. So that guy's going to be a tremendous part of the success of Chicago Bears football, and specifically Chicago Bears defensive football.
So I think some of the ways defensive coordinator Alan Williams there was describing the 3 technique spot are not like unique to Akeem Hicks, but Akeem Hicks fits the mold. I mean, he is fast and explosive even at this age at getting off the line of scrimmage. He's big, he's strong, he's smart, he's savvy. I mean, we don't need to sit here and like convince you that Akeem Hicks is good, right? We've all seen firsthand how good Akeem Hicks has been for this Chicago Bears defense. It just feels like at this stage of his career, you do need to have at least some kind of backup plan, right? If you do re-sign him at a lower number, even the lowest number, or even the higher number, like you can afford to do so. But is Bilal Nichols going to be your backup 3 technique, or is he going to be your backup nose tackle? Is he going to be your replacement for Eddie Goldman at that nose tackle spot? Because both of those spots are going to be important, both in the base and the nickel defense, depending on how they want to align what they're going to do there. So like, I would be perfectly fine re-signing Akeem Hicks and then, drafting a 3 technique defensive tackle. Maybe not, I mean, it doesn't have to be your first pick, but earlier rather than later, right? You don't want it to be a 7th round Kyrus Tonga type pick where, I want to have something in place where if I do re-sign Akeem Hicks, and I do want to, ideally, I want to have a plan in place where if he isn't able to go 100% and has another season of injuries, that I have someone else that I can at least have some hope or rely, not that they would have to have another solid veteran right there, but just someone that like I could turn to and maybe get something extra from, right? Like a rookie that could be a little bit more of a wild card of something great or maybe needs to develop. At least give me something there that's not just, Angelo Blackson or one of these kind of like rotational defensive tackle guys that just kind of just a guy off the street. I want something a little bit above that and not, someone that maybe has starter potential if they're not quite starting caliber just yet to have that option there. But then does that become a luxury then to re-sign Akeem Hicks, right? Does that become a sentimental value? I mean, there is a very real football value if you can get back to it, but are you giving him too much sentimental value in benefit of the doubt of being able to get back to there, or does the objective outside observer say no? Akeem Hicks just hasn't been reliable enough in 2 seasons to be worth that type of investment. I think the other dynamic that's really important here is specifically what your alternatives are. Say you do let Akeem Hicks walk. And we'll look at this free agent market and why Akeem Hicks might be the Bears' best option next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by the makers of the world's best tasting protein bars ever made. They're called Built Bars. And I don't take it lightly when I call them the best protein bars I've ever eaten in my entire life. I eat a lot of protein bars. I try and I eat a Built bar every day now, but even before, I try a lot of different varieties, try and get a lot of protein. I like to go to the gym. I like to work out. I like to stay active and healthy. And I've not been able to find another protein bar product that tastes as delicious as a Built bar, because they're soft, they're easy to chew, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. They taste like candy bars, but they're also really good for you. They've got all the macronutrients I'm looking for and none of that extra crap that makes you feel like garbage. They're low sugar, low calories, high fiber, and high protein. It's the perfect combination of a sweet treat that can satisfy my sweet tooth without, again, loading me up with a bunch of sugar and junk and be bad for me. You got to try them for yourself. There's a bunch of great flavors. Head on over to built.com, enter in our promo code LOCKED15, and you're going to get 15% off your next order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. If the Bears don't re-sign Akeem Hicks, they're going to need something at that 3 technique defensive tackle spot. We just heard defensive coordinator Alan Williams talk about how important that is to this defense and how, that one, he didn't get into a lot of the specifics, but that one gap penetrating up that B gap by the guard is going to be a big part of what they do from a pass rushing standpoint to complement the guys on the outside. But if you don't re-sign Akeem Hicks, you look around the free agent market and it's not star-studded. It's not loaded up with a lot of great alternatives. Like, yes, on the last 2 podcasts, we talked about Allen Robinson as a free agent and James Daniels as a free agent. And as of now, before a lot of these guys have been re-signed, there's plenty of other good wide receiver options if you don't re-sign Allen Robinson, plenty of other good guard options if you don't re-sign James Daniels, and if you just want to go in a different direction with those guys. Not quite as abundant with Akeem Hicks. Right now, actually, PFF has Akeem Hicks as their highest ranked free agent interior defensive lineman across the board. Like, he is the top guy on the market based on not just their grades, but like how they rank, their age. And as a free agent candidate, he is the highest ranked defensive lineman. Your top alternative is going to be Calais Campbell. I mean, again, you're talking, instead of a 32-year-old Akeem Hicks, a 35-year-old Calais Campbell, who's again in this 1-year deal, $8 million type thing. You're going to be a very similar price tag, but just older. The difference being Campbell has been able to stay on the field a little bit more consistently lately compared to Akeem Hicks. I mean, he's been much more steadily available and playing more snaps each season. So that's what you're part of what you're paying for there. Whereas like Hicks has, played the full season in 2020, but it's been a little bit rough outside of that. And Campbell is really like the only other, pretty much the only other household name among free agent defensive linemen. And we should probably mention too that Bilal Nichols is also set to be a free agent. That's sort of been a little bit overlooked in some of this conversation, but the only other household name that I think would be a worthwhile alternative to explore is Sheldon Richardson, most recently of the Minnesota Vikings, but he's played for, I think, the Seahawks and the Browns and a few teams over his career. But he's that sort of interior defensive tackle in the 4-3 defense, but he's also 31, but projected to be a bit cheaper and a little bit, more of a well-rounded guy. Whereas, we've seen sort of Hicks be, again, sort of back and forth on what we've been able to see from him. But other than that, it's a lot of guys that are solid and steady, but not not a lot of like specific three technique pass rushers. There's a decent number of nose tackles out there as far as like replacing Eddie Goldman. You look around a little bit and you can see like BJ Hill from the Bengals or DJ Jones from the 49ers, Linval Joseph from the Chargers, Sebastian Joseph Day from the Rams. Like there are nose tackles to replace as a cheaper Eddie Goldman alternative, but like those sort of like three technique pass rushers outside that are a little bit more mobile and agile and quick. I mean, you have Tim Settle from the Washington Commanders, one of these sort of younger rotational interior pass rushers that has flashed some real promise for them, but he's 24, but he's never been that like full-time starter role. And maybe he's ready for that. But, again, it's a much different type of risk than what we've at least seen Akeem Hicks be proven to be able to do from some of his previous stops. Or like Maurice Hurst from the 49ers. He came out of Michigan. He was an earlier draft pick, I think, by the Raiders. And like when he's been healthy, he's been really good, but has had some trouble staying healthy kind of throughout his career. And like other than that, it's not a great list of guys that you like at that spot. So it's like, well, if you're letting Akeem Hicks go, you're opting for either another old guy or a very unproven young guy or rookies. I mean, or do you put Bilal Nichols in that spot full time, which maybe they do feel more comfortable with putting him there. I think we saw Nichols flash really well, his first season with the Bears as a rookie, but then things have kind of slowed down a little bit since then and hasn't had quite the ascension that perhaps we were hoping for him to carve out. I mean, he seems like he can kind of do the nose tackle thing and can kind of do the three technique thing, but he's just not like special at either right now, or hasn't shown enough consistency to be special at either. So it's like you could go there, like Bilal Nichols and a rookie, sure. And then in terms of a price, I think the projection for Bilal Nichols, as I pull it up here, is still looking at a similar price tag, like $6, $7, $8 million a year because he's younger and can still get better. It's just you're just sort of waiting for that something special to really sort of take your young defensive lineman and make him that much more of a playmaker or something a little bit different. But it's a weird spot. And I think the market is what makes me more inclined to want to bring Akeem Hicks back more than anything else. Like I could, like I said, we could replace Allen Robinson fairly easily. We could replace James Daniels, but I don't know how much better you're gonna replace Akeem Hicks with. You can go laterally here, or you can. I mean, really, what you're trying to replace is the durability and availability more than the actual on-field ability. And I do get that. And if the Bears certainly if their medical information suggests to them that the change definitely needs to be made, then that's the information that we don't have on the outside. But on the field, we've seen how good he can be. I think he's a good scheme fit in Matt Eberflus's defense, and the alternatives don't necessarily wow you as giving you a wide variety of options. We'll see. There certainly is some thought to drafting and developing and getting some younger defensive linemen in there. And maybe if you can get Khalil Mack and Robert Quinn at the levels that they are, maybe you don't need as much of an interior, certainly not an interior pass rushing presence. But, Akeem Hicks' run defense is particularly important, especially in the scheme that the Bears are working and operating under, and just making life easier for the linebackers as well. So I think the Akeem Hicks decision is fascinating in that regard, that the market dynamics shift a little bit more. And then whether they do want him back, whether he wants to be back, or whether he kind of felt like he said his goodbyes to Chicago and is ready to leave. He kind of made the impression that he would like to stay if they'll have him. But I'm curious to see what the Bears ultimately end up doing on the defensive line with Hicks, with Nichols, and with Eddie Goldman. You can be sure we'll keep a close eye on any and all defensive line movement they make all throughout this offseason right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button to keep up with all of our daily in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. If you're looking for your second listen, Locked On NFL podcast covers the league from the full top-down view, getting a wide range of all the top stories in the NFL right now. A lot of Aaron Rodgers talk. What's he going to do? Can the Packers afford him right now? Are they going to blow everything up? If you want to, obviously, Locked On Packers, we'll get that for you too. But if you want more of the national NFL perspective, we've got that. And Peacock and Williamson here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you your team every single day. We break down the Chicago Bears for you. I hope you'll keep following along. Hope you'll keep, as a result, the Locked On Bears podcast will make it that much easier for you to bear down.